reason or emotion, collectivism or individualism, freedom or restraint of the mind. These are among some of the ideas that render the differences between the Neoclassical period and Romantic period. While there are some writers that depict styles of writing where traits from more than one period are present, most writers identify mostly with one period shown in their work. The Neoclassical period, which means the New Classical period, developed in the mid-18th century, and during this period, reason was viewed as the ultimate means to truth. Deism was a concept that was very popular during this period that understood ethics as a matter of reason, order, balance, self-control, and accuracy. Neoclassic thinkers also feared that the new idea of individualism that the moderns favored might lead to social alienation, self-seeking, and the lack of moral responsibility. Neoclassical views leaned on the old traditional values of Greek and Roman cultures. That natural order benefits society as a whole by giving it a structure. Reason had led thinkers to the conclusion that people of royal blood were actually ordinary mortals, just like everybody else. Therefore, the notion of divine right monarchy, which is the belief that monarchs govern with the same authority as God, was destroyed. These ideas that were upheld were reflected through architecture and art during this period. Architecture and art were symmetrical and clean designs that stressed the elements of order and harmony. These organized and disciplined views were also displayed in the literature of the writers of this time as well. Neoclassicism was very influential in England and thus was an important style of sense and logic. Neoclassical works often contained lessons or educated the reader in some way, were much more intellectual, and they were much more intellectual rather than emotional, like the Romantic period. Unlike the Neoclassical period, though, the Romantic period was characterized by emotion, nature, and individualism. It being of more of a medieval context instead of a classical approach. According to our text, life could be understood as a struggle between rationality and emotion, with feeling frequently exercising controlling force. Romanticism rejects the perception of order and rationality and emphasizes the individual. This idea appreciates nature and passion over intellect, focusing more on inner struggles individually. This period focused on having a creative and free spirit and found a new interest in overtly emotional literary expressions. According to William Wordsworth, poetry is the overflow of powerful feelings. The movement of Romanticism favored topics such as poverty and bizarre heroic ideas in literary works. The writers of this period valued intuition over reason and imagination over reality, and their works portrayed nature as a source of beauty and inspiration. Nature was viewed as better than civilization and celebrated the way to God. They used mystical themes, folklore, and music to show rebellion against social convention and celebrated the goodness of humans' personal freedom. Reason and organizing as a principle for art and society was rejected, and writers leaned more on fantasies and gave merit to ordinary people, loners, and outcasts. During the age of Romanticism, many turned away from the artifices of social life and became fulfilled with what was natural within human beings. They believed that certain freedoms are given by nature alone and cannot be justified by being taken away by any government. New poetic forms came about that captured natural rhymes, rhythms, and patterns of human speech, and poets looked to the unconscious mind to spiritual awakening in dreams. This new form of poetry could be described as a lyric poem, which expresses a process of perception, thought, or emotion. There was little rules to the lyric poem, and one could choose any meter, stanza, length, or structure. The ideas of the Romantic period are still widely used today. For example, rap artists exercise the principle of lyric poem in their music. One literary work that reflects the style of the Romantic period is Ralph Waldo Emerson's Self-Reliance essay. Emerson argues that the norms of society has an adverse effect on one's personal growth. He urges to follow individual will instead of conforming to social expectations, and for individuals to follow their own voice. The way that he encourages the reader to be honest in their relationships with one another and to believe what is true for them depicts the individualistic attitude of the Romantic period. His essay has faith in the individual to discern its own path and convinces us to get away from the social pressure that conforms to corrupted societies. This can help us find our destiny that God intended for us to. He supports the values of Romanticism by showing how the inner person is purer and less tainted by society, and how being original instead of leaning on the ways of thinking of those who have come to pass, like those of the Neoclassical period did, is of more value. Now, a work that deeply shows the views of reason of the Neoclassical period is Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal. Swift focuses on showing his readers why structure is so important and makes them question themselves and be uncomfortably aware of their actions. In this work, he calls attention to the poor living conditions of Ireland and provides the reasonable solution for the wealthy to buy children from the poor to eat. He states how reasonable this is and would be preventing sacrificing children and creating a profit for both rich and poor. While this seems very unreasonable, he is showing how hypocritical individuals are. And just because something doesn't make sense to someone else doesn't mean it isn't reasonable. Swift uses the concept of satire through this work, which is a trait of the Enlightenment period during the Neoclassical period. As you can see, the values and ways of thinking between the Neoclassical and Romantic period vary tremendously, and some say that Romanticism has never ended. There are also some ideas today, such as the use of social media and us basing the way that we are from society's view of us, that I feel depicts some neoclassical views as well. What ways do you feel like the ideas from each period are reflected today?